Hello and welcome to Talk Truth. My name is Corey Huntsberger. I've got my father, Alan Huntsberger, in the studio, and we're giving away a free booklet called The Living Stone, A Journey of Transformation. It's yours absolutely free. You can call our toll-free number and get a copy sent to you in the mail. In the U.S., 1-800-445-3450. If you're in Canada, 1-800-915-0056. We need you to get this book because what we're watching is Theo Fleury's testimony. And he says we need to get back to God.
Amen. It's true.
It's true.
Yes.
Let's bring on our guest. We got Mr. Sean Buckley. Sean, welcome back to the show.
Oh, again, just a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you. This testimony is, I know I should be joyful, but I'm kind of sickened by it a little bit. Just the destruction that mankind does on each other, you know what I mean? That the enemy causes people to do on each other. It's just absolutely disgusting. But we were watching Theo Fleury's testimony part 1. If you haven't seen it, you got to watch it. Go back to rumble.com/talktruth, watch it. But what about today, Sean? What are we going to see him talk about today?
Yeah, and just for the audience that isn't familiar with Theo, I mean, he played in the NHL. I think he's 61st overall in scoring, 10th in the WHL, Olympic gold medal, World Junior gold medal. But he got kicked out of the NHL because he had a drug and substance abuse problem and an anger problem, which, he explained yesterday was due to trauma. And, here he basically, God takes him on this journey where, after having a loaded pistol in his mouth, he comes to God, he surrenders, and God's using him to basically bring a message of healing. And then COVID comes and it all shuts down. And you are going to be surprised by what he says. But many of you, you're going to go, wait a second, I had the exact same experience. And this is riveting testimony. There's no other way to describe it. And I mean, God's hands was all over what he was saying.
Yeah, I've never heard someone tie the two together. The abuse that he suffered when he was younger and the abuse that happened during COVID. I haven't heard anyone kind of bring those two together. Fascinating stuff. Watch this. It's part 2 of Theo's testimony.
And then the pandemic happened. And I was as busy as I had ever been at any point in my life, and the world just completely shut down. And I fell into a deep, dark, ugly depression. And like I was having suicidal ideations and I could barely get out of bed. I stopped showering. I stopped eating. I stopped sleeping. And I was just like, what's going on here? So I booked an appointment with my therapist, and obviously we had to do it on Zoom because I couldn't go and see her. And so she said, explain to me what's happening. Why are you in this state? And I was just like, well, so I started to explain to her what was going on in my world. And she said, okay, we'll stop right there. And she goes, what did your pedophile abuser do to you? Well, I said he used manipulation, coercion, lying, cheating. She goes, who's that remind you of? I said, the government. So my pedophile abuser, the same tactics that my pedophile abuser used, same tactics the government used to get us to lock down, to take the jabs, to do all that. And so I, because I wasn't doing anything, people started to invite me to come on their podcast. And so I, being the vulnerable guy I am, and I'm willing to talk about anything. I'm not afraid to talk about my experience with trauma. So I started to explain this, depressive state that I had just come out of. And I don't know, I was probably on 4 or 5 different podcasts where I explained, this depression that I was experiencing. And sure enough, my phone absolutely blew up. And people were saying, well, thank you for explaining what's going on with me right now too, And it was amazing. As soon as, the pandemic happened, we saw a spike in mental illness. we saw a spike in opioid use. You know what I mean? And so basically, I was experiencing trauma. And, you know, when you think about it, who is the biggest perpetrator of trauma on the planet? It's government. It's government, right? If you can't afford to eat, put food on your table, that's trauma. If you can't afford to put gas in your car, that's trauma, right? And so there came a point where I had to decide whether I was going to go all in on this or I was going to be all out. And I decided, you know, and I made a promise to myself a long time ago that if I saw abuse, I was going to call it out. And so basically what you've seen from the last 5 years of me on social media is I'm calling out abuse. And it's systemic government abuse. And nobody talks about the psychology of the pandemic. Because these people, these politicians are master manipulators, master abusers. And we've all experienced the trauma of systemic government abuse. And we, you know, like I've been doing this for 16 years. The last 5 years, I've never dealt with more suicidal people in the whole entire time I've been doing this work. Right? And, you know, because what happens is we get traumatized, okay? And that trauma leaves us in emotional pain and suffering. And it's silent. You can't see it, right? You can't see it. Because we're all really good at wearing lipstick, right? When we leave our houses, we look together, everything's great, you know, how you doing? I'm fine, you know, all this stuff. But when we experience emotional pain, what is emotional pain? It's mental illness, right? So then how are we going to deal with this pain and suffering that is left behind from trauma? Well, we're going to gravitate towards the dark side of life, and we're going to get involved in addictive behavior as a coping mechanism to suppress the emotional pain that we're experiencing. And I'll tell you a little story about how disgusting Big Pharma is Big Pharma created a drug that replaces relationship, okay? So when we're in a healthy relationship, well, let me just back up first. So for the last 6 years, we've been drinking cortisol milkshakes, okay? And cortisol is a stress hormone, all right? And it's like acid in your body, right? So if you're stressed and you're struggling, this will actually start to fray and cause you all kinds of problems in your nervous system, all right? So the government knew that we can't connect on a spiritual level, okay? And so when we're in a healthy relationship, we create this chemical in our body called oxytocin. And oxytocin is the drug of love and connection. And what oxytocin does is it goes in and it sucks up all the cortisol, okay? So the government created a drug called Oxycontin. Sound familiar to oxytocin? Okay. Well, if you look at these two drugs underneath the microscope, they look exactly the same, except Oxycontin has one little extra arm on it, which makes us addicted to it, and we need more and more of it, right? And so I work with fentanyl users, heroin users, oxy users, and I say to them, why are you guys so crazy for this drug? And they say, well, it gives me the warm and fuzzies. So it has replaced relationship. And that's why it's the most used, most sought after drug on the planet. Okay? And if you're reading the news these days and wondering why Donald Trump wants us to become the 51st state, well, we have a fentanyl problem in Canada. And we have fentanyl labs all over the place making this drug. And nobody talks about why. Well, we have an unresolved trauma crisis on the planet. And we need people to get into healing environments and healing situations. And so that's what I advocate for. That's what I talk about almost every single day of my life. Because when I'm out on the road, you know what I see? All I see is pain and suffering. That's it. That's all I see. And it's so unnecessary. It's so beneath us as a human race. And I'm exhausted. I'm tired of having to deal with this when the government doesn't want any part of this. When the government talks about, ending the fentanyl crisis or ending addiction or whatever, they never once mention the word trauma.
Theo, I want to go several directions with
Sure.
what you've said, and I actually, I've just been mesmerized by you sharing with us. But how does the nation, how do we as individuals face the trauma and start to deal with it? Because you've spent a lot of time looking into that.
Yeah. Well, the cheapest, most effective kind of therapy is kind of what we're doing today. It's called the NCI National Citizens Inquiry, where you get a bunch of people in a room, you get a bunch of vulnerable speakers, and you talk about the issues and you talk about the problems, and then you come up with the solutions, right? That's how we do it in therapy, right? Because here's what happens. We live in a world where nobody feels safe anymore. Nobody feels safe, right? And in the therapy world, if you don't feel safe, you're going to drink, you're going to do drugs, you're going to abuse your kids, you're going to abuse your wives, you're going to abuse society. That's what's going to happen. Because nobody feels safe. But what I've experienced is when you're vulnerable, is vulnerability creates safety, okay? And then once you have safety in a room, that's when the magic of healing happens, is when people feel safe and not judged and heard and hugged and loved and embraced, right? That's when the magic of healing happens. And, it's a mind, body, and spirit journey. And I would say 99.9% of the addicts and alcoholics who don't make it don't find God. And the people who embrace a relationship and a conscious contact with something greater than themselves, those people make it. And when they make it, they help the next person do the exact same thing, right? Because like I said, 20 years ago, I had a fully loaded pistol in my mouth, ready to pull the trigger and end my life because I was in that kind of emotional pain and suffering. And I couldn't see any way out, right? And I burned up every single relationship I had in my life. Every person that loved me was completely gone. Why? Because what addicts and alcoholics are really good at, you know what we're really good at? We're good at collecting enablers. And the more enablers we have, the longer our behavior can last. But what happens is we make the enablers sick from our behavior, and then they got to go away and they got to go take care of themselves. And then we're left to our own defenses. And there's only one entity that we can reach out and ask for help, and that's God. And that's what happened to me on September 17th of 2005. And I've been sober 7,110 days since I surrendered, and you know what I mean? So, like, if we solve the trauma crisis on this planet, whatever these clowns are doing in Ottawa won't matter one bit, because we will overcome that. They won't be able to touch us because our vibration will be so high, it won't matter.
You know, I wonder if you're giving us some answer collectively that you might not have been intending to give us. And Theo, you're...
Well, I'm here representing God. So, and I prayed to God before I walked in here to say, God, use me as a vehicle. Whatever you want me to tell this panel or whatever it is, use me as a vehicle. So whatever you're hearing today comes from not me. It's not me speaking.
And I can tell you, this place has a lot of prayer covering right now. So we've had a lot of speakers come in and say, and myself included, when I give openings, you know, we've got to start telling people the truth. But I think when all of us are saying that, we're thinking, well, the truth of what's going on outside of ourselves. But I think what you're telling us is we have to start sharing with other people the truth that's inside ourselves.
Yes.
We have to start sharing our experience
Yes.
of what's inside.
Yeah. Because trauma is the string that binds us all together as human beings, right? It's the path back to God, right? Why do you think God gives us adversity in our lives? It's to create resilience. And then once you have resilience, it's like, bring it on. I'll figure it out. That's why none of this stuff that's happened in the last 6 years has bothered me one bit. Because the government can't do anything to me that I haven't already experienced before, that I haven't already been through. Like, you think this is my first spiritual war that I've been through? No. This is like the third or fourth. Because abuse is abuse is abuse. And we use abuse to get people to stay in line, and we fill them with fear. And when, you know, and when you're traumatized and you're not on a healing journey, you can't think critically. It's impossible to think critically, because you know what you're doing? All you're doing is trying to survive. That's it. And then the government sets it up where, geez, I got to work so that I can feed my family and put gas in my car and go to work. And that's all you're focused on. You're not focused on the outside issues. You're not even thinking that you're being abused by the government at all.
Oh, and again, I think something's happening here that's very important for us to understand. Mm-hmm. Because if collectively we're kind of stalled because we're being abused, if we don't recognize that actually we're suffering from mental illness, we're abused. If I can just share with you, sometimes when I lecture, especially in Alberta, I'll ask the crowd, I'll say, like, put up your hand if during the darkest times of COVID, you honestly believe that the army would be going door to door, dragging Canadians out of their homes and forcefully jabbing them. And Theo, some rooms, every hand goes up.
Absolutely.
And the lowest I've ever had is...
Rachel Notley said it.
Oh, I understand. And we could just go on, but I don't think we even appreciate the level of trauma that we have.
No.
And I think the gift that is coming through you today is to help us to understand, wait a second, we're all traumatized and we have to start that healing. And what you've said is, well, we've got to start talking about the hurt inside of us.
Yeah.
Like and actually allowing, you know, like, because, there's vax, non-vax. We have to create an environment where the vax can also talk about the pain that's inside of them, because it didn't matter what narrative you believed, this was as traumatic as can be.
Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't get more traumatic than a vaccine injury where you're a healthy human being and then you take the vax and then all of a sudden you can't function and That's trauma. That's it's trauma.
We had one witness share with us, the term needle rape.
Yeah.
So that, there were a whole bunch of healthcare providers that may not be injured,
Mm-hmm.
or at least they don't know if they're injured, but they felt they had to take it. And what the nurses were saying to this paramedic was, well, we call it needle rape, but it's worse than a sexual rape. A sexual rape, we get tested right away. We know if we're hurt.
Right.
With this, we don't know if we hurt, but they feel that their body's been violated. Well, that would be an awful feeling. So I think all of us need to start sharing what's on the inside.
100%. That's the only way out, right? It's the only way out is honesty, openness, and willingness. That's it. That's how I saved my own life was, I tried everything on the planet to get rid of this pain, but I hadn't tried honesty. And I wrote the book. And I was as honest as I possibly could be. And guess what happened? I found my tribe because I shared the deepest, darkest secrets, right? We have a saying in 12-step. You're only as sick as your secrets. You're only as sick as your secrets. Well, guess what? I had a secret. I was sick physically, emotionally, spiritually sick, right? And if you look at the government, think they got a few secrets? And are they sick? They're very sick. Sick people, right? They're abusers, right? Do you know what pedophiles tell me in prison? Don't let me out of here. This is the only place in the world I feel safe. I go, why is that? They go, because the urge is greater than my own common sense. So even though I know I'm doing something bad and I'm hurting somebody, I can't stop myself. So why are we letting these guys out of prison? Doesn't make sense. But you're right. We need to become vulnerable. And we need to become people of faith. We got to get back to God, because that's the only way out of this. That is the only way out of this.
Fascinating testimony, Sean. We've been saying this. I know you've been on this program for a while too. Over and over and over again. We have to get back to God. We have to get back to God. It's the only answer.
Well, and this is coming from somebody that's had that incredible journey. I mean, he explained yesterday how he had a loaded pistol in his mouth. And then, basically 17 years ago, he's on a bathroom floor at the bottom, and he gives his life over to God. He understands that's the only way. So, and he's become an expert on addiction and trauma. And what a parallel. I mean, it's so interesting. He's gotten through that. He's helping people pre-COVID. He's, basically lecturing everywhere he can. He's helping whoever he can. God's using him in a large way. And then COVID hits and it all gets locked down. And isn't it surprising? He finds himself in this deep, ugly depression, as he describes it. And he's wanting to commit suicide. Like he's having another bottom and he doesn't understand what it is. And then this therapist connects it to, well, you're being traumatized again. Until I heard Theo say that, it didn't occur to me to basically define what had happened during COVID as abuse. But now that he's made that linkage, I mean, I can see it. We were all, under this psychological manipulation where, you had to mask, you had to stay home, you needed police state identity papers if you wanted to go to a restaurant or your kid's hockey game. Like, I felt like the nation was sliding into a full-blown police state, and I found that traumatic. And even the idea then that, I need to go to God with that, and I need to be able to speak about it because, there's something about sharing and, in a safe environment and just talking it out.
Yeah.
Well, that hadn't occurred to me.
Yeah. Pastor Allen, I'm going to give you some time for some thoughts.
Well, I guess I look at it from another perspective, and, I'm not discounting anything that either Theo or you, Sean, are saying about what COVID did, but it didn't affect me that way. I always First of all, I never believed any of the news reports that were coming that saying people were dropping dead like flies and all that kind of stuff. I never believed that that was going to be a worldwide problem or a situation because it's not in the Bible. And I study the Word of God, and I've done it for years and years and years, and it's not in the Bible. So something was going on that I didn't fully understand, but I knew that God is in control and that whatever's going on, will rectify itself. So
Yeah, well, I think that's why, though, we encourage people to get a stronger relationship with Jesus, because I think depending on the strength and your reliance and your belief and faith in God, I think that is what carries you through a lot of these storms that the government and all these people are trying to put on you, right?
yeah, and then of course I've never been traumatized. Basically, I grew up in a great home and all that kind of thing. So to have a reflect back into being traumatized, I can see how that happened. And yes, the government is a bully, no question. And the government has overstepped its bounds, no question. But the beautiful thing is that does not mean that God has taken a vacation, that he's not involved. He is involved.
Yeah, well, Sean, I appreciate you getting Theo's testimony. I appreciate Theo actually being brave enough to share it and get broadcast, because I know that couldn't have been easy, but I know he's out there trying to help people, as many as he can. So thank you so much, Sean, for being here and everything you guys are doing. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. And just to tie in what Alan was saying, I mean, Theo basically said 99.9% of addicts who fail, so they don't succeed, they're the ones that don't find God. So, I mean, I think that speaks volumes. Like, the way through whatever your trauma is to seek him.
Yeah,
Amen.
absolutely. Appreciate you, Sean. We'll have you back.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Wow. Heavy testimony. But we got to remember our verse, Alan. The earth and everything in it, the world and its inhabitants belong to the Lord, for he laid its foundation on the seas and established it on the rivers. Psalm 24, 1 and 2. Powerful verse. Get connected with that verse. Understand what it means. It will help you.
Amen.
You want to help support our mission, keep this kind of conversation on the air. We are viewer supported and need your help. You can go to our website, gotalktruth.com, and click on the donate button. That way you can give digitally. If you like to do it through the mail, which many people do, you can make a check payable to Heritage Christian Ministries Association and send it to 246 Stewart Green, Southwest Suite 3260, Calgary, Alberta, T3H 3C8. And you can also get prayer or donate on our toll-free line, 1-800-915-0056 in Canada, 1-800-445-3450 in the U.S. All right, Dad, we're out of time. We'll see you guys later.
Love you.